Are we letting the cleaning staff dine with us now? Patricia Kingsley's voice cut across the Hamptons Country Club terrace as she stared at the elegant black woman in the church dress. The billionaire matriarch had no idea she'd just insulted the mother of the man, about to sign a $900 million deal with her family. What happened in the next 20 minutes wouldn't just destroy a business empire. It would expose generational racism and trigger a movement that changed everything. Vera Sterling had stepped out of her black Lincoln Navigator, wearing her finest dress, carrying herself with dignity earned through decades of sacrifice. Her son Quincy had built a logistics empire from a single Newark warehouse, and today it was becoming part of the Kingsley Group. Old money, deep roots, billionaire legacy. But Patricia barely looked up from her wineglass before the words slipped out, loud enough for the entire terrace to hear. The woman Patricia had just humiliated wasn't just any guest. She was the mother of the black CEO sitting 20 feet away, about to sign the contract that would secure the Kingsley family's financial future for generations. And the son who witnessed that moment? He wasn't just any businessman. He was someone who'd rather lose $900 million than let disrespect slide, because sometimes the most expensive words are the ones that cost you everything. The valet barely had time to open her door before Vera Sterling stepped out of the black Lincoln Navigator, clutching her leather purse with both hands. She didn't wear labels, but everything about her said quality. Clean lines, pressed seams, and dignity in every step. Her hat was white, wide-brimmed with a ribbon that matched her shoes. A church hat, the kind her late husband always complimented her on. The Hamptons Country Club sat quiet under a cloudless sky, its manicured lawns stretching toward the water like green silk. Quincy had told her this lunch would be low-key. "Just come, Ma. No big speeches, just a quiet toast after the signing." She was proud of him, of what he'd built. A logistics empire that had grown from one warehouse in Newark to a nationwide supply chain infrastructure. And today it was about to become part of something much larger, the Kingsley Group. Old money, deep roots. But Vera didn't care about all that. She came to support her son. She came because he asked. She barely made it past the marble steps before a woman in a navy blue uniform stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Excuse me," the woman said, no smile. "Deliveries and staff use the back entrance." Vera tilted her head, confused. "I'm here for lunch with my son, Quincy Sterling." The woman didn't blink. "Yes, well, if you're with staff or catering, it's policy. The rear access is on the left." Vera blinked slowly. It wasn't the first time someone had assumed, but it never stopped stinging. "I'm not staff, I'm a guest." From across the patio, Quincy Sterling had just raised his glass. His eyes scanned the lawn, found his mother, and noticed the uniformed woman's posture. Something tightened in his chest. Vera took a breath, trying to stay composed. "You can check the list. My name is Vera Sterling. My son is one of the owners meeting here today." Before the woman could respond, a crisp voice sliced through the conversation like glass dragging across tile. "Well, I suppose they let anyone in these days," said Patricia Kingsley, her pearls resting heavily against her blouse. "Are we letting the cleaning staff dine with us now?" Several heads turned. One man chuckled under his breath. Quincy's jaw shifted. He was mid-toast, still holding the champagne flute, but his smile had vanished. He set the glass down slowly. His colleagues noticed the change in his expression. One of the Kingsley sons, Bradley, the youngest, gave a nervous laugh. She was probably joking. But Quincy didn't hear him. He was already moving. Vera looked up, her face still calm but her hands clenched tighter around her bag. Patricia was already walking off, giving no further thought to what she'd said. Just another day for her. Quincy walked straight to his mother, placed a hand gently on her shoulder and looked her in the eye. "You okay?" She nodded, even though she wasn't. "I don't want to make a fuss, baby." "I know you don't," he said, "but I will." He turned to the staffer. "This is my mother. You just disrespected the most important person in this building." The woman opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked embarrassed now, flushed. Quincy didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He walked Vera back to the SUV, opened the door for her himself, and helped her in. She reached for his arm before he closed the door. "Don't ruin your moment over me." He gave her a look. "You are the moment." Then he shut the door and walked back up those marble steps with a calmness that masked a deep fire brewing beneath. What her son, the CEO, did next, no one saw it coming. Back inside the dining hall, Quincy's seat sat untouched. The pen meant for signing the final agreement rested beside a thick packet of papers. Over a year of negotiations, revisions, and corporate alignment strategies, all leading up to this day. A champagne tower gleamed near the windows. Everything was in place except Quincy. The mood shifted the moment he returned. Not dramatically. There was no yelling, no angry declarations. Just that heavy, tense quiet that follows a storm cloud no one dares point at. "Everything all right?" asked Preston Ward, the Kingsley Group's general counsel. His voice held forced calm, the way a man speaks when he senses $1 million problem and doesn't know where it's coming from yet. Quincy didn't answer right away. He looked around the room, the board members, the family, the lawyers. Then his gaze stopped at Patricia Kingsley. She was still sipping her wine, half-turned in her chair, legs crossed like she hadn't even noticed the disruption. She wasn't just comfortable, she looked certain that this deal was already locked in, that money had smoothed out everything. He walked over to his chair, placed both hands on the back of it, and didn't sit. "I want to say something," he said. A few people looked up. The room didn't quiet, it froze. "You all know how much this deal meant. Not just for our companies, for the markets, for the next generation of tech infrastructure in this country. This merger would have changed everything." He paused, looking at every face one by one. "But I'm not signing it." There were 2 seconds of stillness. Then the voices started. Low murmurs, confusion, someone saying, "Wait, what?" Patricia's head turned now. Not fast, but sharply enough to know she'd felt the slap in his words. "Excuse me," she said, almost a laugh. Quincy nodded. "Excuse you indeed." "Is this a negotiation tactic?" Preston tried. "Quincy, if there's a concern, we can go back to the table." Quincy finally sat down. Not in the signing chair, but the one at the far end, furthest from the paperwork. "No, there's no more table." Patricia scoffed, then leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's not overreact to a simple misunderstanding. I didn't recognize the woman, that's all." He blinked once, slow. "That woman is my mother." "I'm aware of that now," she replied, trying to keep her voice cool. "But surely," Quincy cut her off, voice low, almost gentle. "You knew what you were doing, you said what you meant." Preston cleared his throat. "We've invested millions into prep, both sides. There are legal implications here." Quincy leaned back unbothered. "Then I'll see you in court. You can explain to a judge why disrespecting my family was part of your strategy." "Don't be emotional," Patricia muttered. "That did it." He leaned forward again, folding his hands. "You think I built this company from a corner office? I loaded trucks, Patricia. I drove routes at 3 a.m. I ran payroll from a folding table when we couldn't afford an accountant. I watched my mother take the bus to clean houses so I could keep the lights on in our apartment. So when she shows up here wearing her finest, proud as hell, and you humiliate her, you humiliate me." No one said anything then. Quincy stood one last time. "There are deals you lose sleep over not signing. This isn't one of them." He walked out. No folder, no papers, no handshake, just silence. But what he did next, just hours later, shook up boardrooms, headlines, and families from coast to coast. By the next morning, silence wasn't an option for anyone involved. The media had already picked up the story, and they were hungry. The first outlet to run it was a small business podcast out of Philadelphia. Sayers' guest who attended the merger luncheon leaked just enough. Black CEO walks out of $900 million deal after mother insulted by white billionaire family. That headline alone had enough fuel to burn. By noon, TechPulse, Forbes, and Business Today had picked it up. By 5, cable news anchors were already debating it. The story was everywhere, not because a deal fell through, but because of why it did. A camera caught Quincy Sterling walking into his downtown office in Manhattan the next morning. No sunglasses, no entourage, just him holding a coffee and nodding to the front desk receptionist like he always did. One reporter shouted, "Was the Kingsley comment the reason you cancelled?" Another asked, "Do you regret walking away from $900 million?" He didn't answer, not yet. Inside the building, his team had already been fielding non-stop calls. Some investors were confused, others were furious, but a surprising number were proud. Messages flooded their inboxes. Executives from other firms, warehouse workers, teachers, retired veterans, all saying the same thing. Thank you for not letting that slide. That afternoon, Quincy scheduled a press conference. No press kits, no staged backdrop. Just a single podium, a folding table, and 20 reporters crammed into a conference room built for 10. He stepped up to the mic and looked tired but steady. "I didn't cancel the deal because of money," he began. "I cancelled it because the second you allow disrespect into the room, it spreads. I wasn't raised that way, and I won't build a future on top of silence." A woman from CNBC asked if it was true that Patricia Kingsley had made the comment directly. Quincy didn't flinch. "Yes, loud enough for people nearby to hear, loud enough for my mother to feel it." "Some might say that's not a reason to walk away from a company-defining deal," another reporter chimed in. He nodded slowly. "Depends on what kind of company you're trying to define." The room fell quiet again. He didn't speak for long. He didn't need to. Respect isn't negotiable, and if we start trading that for contracts, then we've already lost. He stepped down, walked out, just like he had the day before. But outside that conference room, the world had changed, and in places where people usually whispered, they were suddenly speaking loud. That same night, clips of his speech made it to TikTok, X, and YouTube. A former employee of the Kingsley family posted a story of being told to use the service elevator during a charity gala. A Latina caterer shared how she'd once been asked to remove her apron before entering a front lobby for a setup. The thread got thousands of shares in hours. Quincy hadn't planned any of it. He wasn't trying to start a movement. But sometimes all it takes is one person standing still for others to find their footing. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the Kingsley group was scrambling. In an emergency board meeting, Patricia's oldest son, Clinton Kingsley, who'd been mostly absent during negotiations, asked the question none of them wanted to face. "Do we have to issue an apology?" Patricia frowned. "I don't apologize to people who overreact." "You insulted the man's mother, Vic," someone snapped. "In public, during the deal signing. What did you think was going to happen?" "We've made comments worse than that to each other in this room," she argued, "and none of us lost $1 billion acquisition over it." "But the numbers were shifting," Clinton muttered. Stockholders started asking questions. Brand analysts warned about reputation costs. Even their PR firm hesitated when asked to spin the narrative. That weekend, the Kingsley name took a hit. People remembered every story they'd heard and buried, every encounter that didn't feel quite right. What had once been seen as old money class was now under a new lens, entitlement with a smile. The media had already picked up the story and they were hungry. While the Kingsleys scrambled to contain the fallout, Quincy was about to face pressure of a different kind, this time from inside his own circle. Inside the New York headquarters, things weren't exactly peaceful either. Quincy's decision had made him a symbol in the public eye, but symbols attract weight, pressure, scrutiny. Some of it came quietly, behind closed doors. Some didn't. He met with his executive team in the upstairs conference room, a wide glass space overlooking Market Street. Most of them had been with him from the beginning, some since the warehouse days. But loyalty has layers, and not everyone was on the same page. Nathan Cartwright, his CFO, was the first to speak up. "We need to talk about what this means long term, not just this week. 6 months out, we had international infrastructure tied to this merger, Quincy." "I know," Quincy replied, calm. "We're looking at legal backlash. Kingsley is already drafting breach claims. Their lawyers are saying you killed the deal for personal reasons." "It wasn't personal," Quincy said. "It was principle." "But can we afford principle right now?" asked Marcus Pemberton, his COO. "We're barely a Series C company. You think the board's not going to panic?" Quincy looked at Marcus, eyes steady. "Let them." That shut the room up for a moment. Then Olivia Harrington, head of marketing, leaned forward. "Quincy, I support your decision, I really do. But you've got to understand you became a headline, a symbol. People are calling you the man who walked away from generational wealth to protect his mother. That comes with heat. You're now the guy who said no to $900 million because someone insulted his mom in public," Nathan added. "I said no to being owned," Quincy replied. "I get that," Olivia said. But if you don't take control of the narrative, someone else will fast. Nathan added, "We're seeing it already. Some investors are nervous. I had 2 calls this morning. They want assurances, they want a plan." Quincy stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city looked ordinary. Traffic moved. A mother walked her kid across the street, holding his hand tight. He thought of Vera. How small she looked on those marble steps in the Hamptons. How tall she stood anyway. "I'm not going to teach people that power means swallowing everything," Quincy said finally. "Not here. Not in my company. And not for a check." Marcus leaned back, frustrated. "Okay, but what if we collapse because of this?" "Then we rebuild," Quincy said. "But at least we don't rot from the inside." There was silence after that. And then something unexpected happened. Olivia nodded. Then Nathan. And finally Marcus gave a reluctant shrug. "We'll hold," Nathan said. "For now." They didn't all agree. Not fully. But something shifted in the room. Maybe respect, maybe fear, maybe both. But outside those walls, not everyone was as ready to stand beside him, especially those who'd been betting on the payout. 2 days later, Quincy's phone buzzed. A message from Trevor Sterling, his cousin and co-founder. One line was, "We need to talk, face to face." They met at a diner in West Orange, same booth where they'd once sketched their first business plan on napkins. Trevor arrived early, already sitting with coffee when Quincy slid in across from him. "I heard from Monroe Bank this morning," Trevor said, not wasting time. "They're pausing our credit line. The one we were going to use to scale West Coast operations." Quincy nodded. "I figured they might." Trevor stared. "You figured?" "Quincy, we were right there. This wasn't some random buyout. This was our generational leap, our kids' future. And I wasn't going to let that future be built on my mother's humiliation," Quincy replied. Trevor shook his head, eyes hard. "You ever think maybe that was her fight to pick, not yours?" Quincy leaned in. "She wasn't fighting. She was being stepped on." Trevor sighed. "This isn't the same as back in Newark. You made a decision for all of us without asking. And now, people are saying you did it for clout." "I did it because I was raised not to sell my name for a seat at someone else's table." Trevor sat back, lips tight. "Your lucky folks see you as a hero. You'd better hope that lasts." Quincy stood, tossing a 20 on the table. "If it doesn't, I'll still sleep fine." But deep down, even Quincy knew the real storm hadn't hit yet. Not until the Kingsleys made their next move. What they discovered next would destroy everything they believed. The Kingsley estate in the Hamptons was built like a fortress. Stone walls, antique iron gates, and hedges trimmed like they were in military formation. Inside the main study, the family gathered around a long mahogany table. The air was stiff. No one dared sip the wine that had been poured. Patricia Kingsley sat at the head, her fingers clasped under her chin, expression unreadable. Clinton, her eldest, was pacing. Bradley scrolled through his phone, visibly nervous. The only one who spoke with ease was Eleanor Wynne, their crisis PR manager. "We need to issue a statement," she said, "something short, acknowledging the incident, expressing regret, emphasizing your shared values." Patricia scoffed. "What values? That woman looked like she didn't belong. That's not my fault." Eleanor blinked once, slowly. "You just said that out loud, in front of your children." "While I'm here trying to protect your legacy." Clinton stopped pacing. "Mom, Quincy's walking away has already tanked interest in our tech sector portfolio. Do you understand how bad this is?" "He'll come back," she said confidently. "They always do. Pride fades when the money runs dry." Eleanor shut her binder with a snap. "You don't get it. This isn't about the deal anymore. This is cultural." He struck a chord. Bradley looked up from his phone. "People are calling him a hero, Mom. They're reposting that speech, quoting him like he's some civil rights icon." Patricia waved a hand. "They'll forget by next week." Clinton looked at her like she was an old painting cracking at the edges. "They won't. You've become the symbol of elitist racism in every podcast and headline right now, and you haven't even said sorry." "I'm not apologizing for having standards." "Then we're done," Clinton said flatly. "You've already cost us one deal. I'm not letting you cost us the entire family business." She turned slowly to look at him. "You're going to side with them?" "No," he said, voice firm. "I'm siding with reality." The room was silent again. Patricia's empire, built on carefully curated polish and control, was wobbling. Because all the press releases in the world couldn't erase that moment on the terrace, her voice, that tone, and the look on Vera Sterling's face. Eventually, the Kingsleys released a statement. It was bland, cold, full of legal language and generic regret. The Kingsley Group regrets the recent miscommunication that led to the premature end of the merger. We continue to uphold values of inclusion and mutual respect. Quincy didn't respond publicly, but his silence said more than any post could. Instead, he kept building. By now, journalists had dug into his background. Photos of young Quincy delivering packages in New York. A quote from a former teacher who remembered him staying after class to study business books. One clip from a podcast resurfaced, him saying, "I'm not trying to be in anyone's club. I'm trying to build my own house." Meanwhile, Vera had become a figure in her own right. She appeared briefly on Morning Update, sitting in a simple chair, hands in her lap. "I didn't ask for attention," she said, "but I raised my son to speak when silence cost too much. The host asked if she would have preferred he signed the deal anyway." She smiled, soft but firm. "Some money comes with chains. I'm too old to wear chains." The clip went viral. Influencers stitched it, young entrepreneurs quoted it on panels, and quietly companies started pulling out of Kingsley partnerships. Not because of Quincy, but because of what Patricia had come to represent in an era where reputation travels faster than fact. Perception becomes reality, and reality was shifting. Still, Quincy didn't gloat. He went to work, met with partners, hired more staff, and visited his mother every Sunday, bringing her gardenias and banana pudding from the same bakery she loved in Newark. But just when things seemed to be stabilizing, an unexpected phone call would pull Quincy right back into the spotlight. This time, not for what he'd walked away from, but for what someone else had dug up. The real storm hadn't hit yet. The call came just after 8 p.m. on a Wednesday. Quincy was alone in his office working through projections. The building was mostly dark, cleaning crews moving quietly through the lower floors. He almost didn't answer when he saw the number, blocked caller, but something told him to pick up. "Mr. Sterling." The voice was sharp, a little raspy, like it belonged to someone who'd smoked for decades but only just quit. "I'm not calling for trouble. I'm calling because you need to know what they're trying to do." Quincy sat up. "Who is this?" "I worked with the Kingsleys for 15 years. I was on their legal acquisition team." "You're not the first name they've tried to erase when it didn't suit them." "Erase?" "They're preparing a countersuit," the voice continued. "They're digging into your early filings, your first funding rounds, trying to frame you as unstable. They want to make you look volatile, unpredictable, say you brought politics into business and ruined shareholder value. They're hoping people will forget why you walked away in the first place." Quincy leaned back, staring out at the tall window. "And why are you telling me?" "Because I've seen this before. They destroy, then deny. You made the mistake of embarrassing them in public. They'll try to bury you quietly." The line clicked dead. Quincy sat there, unmoving. He knew the Kingsleys played hardball, but this, it was war. And it wouldn't stop at his name. They'd aim at his reputation, his team, even his mother if they had to. He called Olivia Harrington the next morning. "They're coming after you," she said, unsurprised after he relayed the call. "Patricia doesn't lose quietly. She's going to weaponize your story and flip the narrative, make it seem like you're the aggressor." "Let her try," Quincy replied. But Olivia was already thinking 5 steps ahead. "We need to show people who you are before she tells them who you're not." She got to work. Within 48 hours, a new media campaign launched. No slogans, no drama, just real stories. Warehouse workers recorded testimonials. Investors talked about Quincy's transparency during tough quarters. Former interns posted videos of how he mentored them without cameras or hashtags. But the most powerful video came from Vera, seated in her small living room. She looked straight at the camera and said, "I didn't raise my son to be a businessman. I raised him to be a man who stands when standing means losing something." It landed like a thunderclap. Cable news couldn't ignore it. The hashtags trended again, and suddenly the Kingsley strategy, subtle, discrediting, veiled accusations, started to look like what it really was: bitterness. Still, They didn't stop. A week later, the Kingsley Group released documents suggesting Quincy had violated early partnership clauses during a 2021 deal with Stratus Line Logistics. It was supposed to imply he had a history of cutting ties abruptly. But Stratus's CEO, Leonard Greer, went on the record the same day. Quincy left our deal because he refused to approve wage cuts for our drivers. I wish I'd done the same. It backfired again. The narrative was slipping out of the Kingsley family's grip, and every attempt to regain control only magnified the original wound, one they still refused to acknowledge or apologize for. Inside the Kingsley home, Patricia was beginning to feel the walls close in. Contracts evaporated, event invites disappeared, a museum board rescinded her honorary seat. But Patricia didn't blame herself. Not once. "It's a fad," she snapped at Clinton over breakfast. "Social media outrage, it'll fade." Clinton wasn't sure anymore. "It's not fading, Mother, it's building, because you never once said you were wrong." She sipped her coffee like the conversation bored her. "And I won't." He stood then. "The family business doesn't need you anymore." She didn't respond, but for the first time her hands trembled just slightly. "If you believe Quincy made the right choice walking away from $900 million to protect his mother's dignity, type respect below." But while the Kingsleys were losing ground, Quincy was about to face a moment of truth, one that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with legacy. But what happened next proved that justice has no limits. Quincy stood in his mother's backyard in Newark, watching her clip basil from the small planter box they'd built together 2 summers ago. The sun was low, casting a soft orange glow on the grass, and Vera wore one of her older church dresses, faded at the seams but still neatly pressed. She didn't say much, just moved slowly, methodically, like the weight of the last few weeks hadn't touched her. But Quincy knew better. "Mom," he said, not looking directly at her, "you all right with all this attention?" She didn't look up. "Attention don't bother me, but I know what comes with it." "What do you mean?" Vera snipped another leaf, placing it gently into the bowl resting on her hip. "They don't like it when we walk out of the room with our heads high. Makes them feel small, so they try to make you feel smaller." He sat down on the porch steps. "They're still trying. Still spinning it like I blew up the deal over nothing." She finally looked at him. "You know it wasn't nothing, and anyone who says that don't know the cost of respect." He nodded, silent for a beat. "Trevor's still upset. Feels like I took something from the family." Vera walked over, lowering herself onto the steps beside him. "Baby, every family's got their storm, but if you bend in the middle of it, what do you hand down to the ones after you?" "I just wanted to protect you," he said, his voice softening. "And you did," she replied. "But it wasn't just about me. It was about what you represent now. Don't run from that." Quincy sat with her words. Later that night, back at his apartment in Jersey City, he watched a news segment replay footage from his press conference. He didn't like hearing himself on camera, too polished, too deliberate. That wasn't how he grew up speaking, but now the world listened to every word like it was a statement of policy. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Leonard Greer, the Stratus CEO. "DC Council wants to speak with you. They're building a panel around ethical business practices. You'd be leading it." Quincy stared at the screen. He never asked for this. He just wanted to build something that lasted, something honest. But now his story was turning into something bigger, something louder, and with that came pressure he hadn't planned for. The next morning he met with Olivia and Marcus again. This time, the energy in the room had shifted. There were no raised voices, just tired eyes and long exhales. Marcus spoke first. "We've stabilized, that's the good news." Olivia followed. "And the noise is helping, actually. Not hurting. 3 mid-sized logistics firms want to partner with us, quietly but still, because we stood for something." "Because you stood for something," Olivia corrected him. He paused. "And now they want me to speak for it. Lead panels, sit on committees, be the face of some new movement." "Maybe that's what comes next," Marcus said. "You've already built the business. Now build the voice." But Quincy looked unsure. He'd never wanted to be a symbol. Symbols are heavy. People worship them or tear them down, and neither felt like a life he wanted. but he also knew silence had its price. He picked up a dry erase marker and started sketching on the wallboard. Numbers, timelines, expansion plans. Nothing flashy, just the next phase of growth. "Let's scale without them," he said. "Let's prove we never needed that deal in the first place." Olivia smiled. "Now that's the Quincy I remember." Marcus chuckled. "Took you long enough to show back up." But Quincy wasn't done. He pointed at the calendar. "And next week I want to hold something here. Not a press conference, a real event. Warehouse crew, interns, junior staff, food, music. Remind everyone who we are." "Like a community day?" Olivia asked. "No. Like a family reunion, the kind where everyone gets a plate no matter where they came from." But before he could pull that together, a final letter would arrive, one that had nothing to do with the Kingsleys, yet would shake him just as deeply. The truth they found would change everything forever. The envelope was thin, off-white, no return address. Just Quincy's name typed clean across the center. It arrived through regular mail, mixed in with invoices and vendor proposals. He didn't notice it at first, didn't even open it until hours later, when the office had cleared out and the cleaning crew was humming somewhere down the hall. The letter inside was handwritten, neat cursive, every loop and curve careful, like the writer had practiced before putting pen to paper. "Mr. Sterling, you don't know me, but I know who you are. My father was the groundskeeper at Kingsley Ridge from 1985 until he died in 2019. He raised me and my two sisters on that job, woke up before the sun, never complained, taught us to be proud, even when we were invisible. I saw your story on the news and I cried. Not because I was surprised by what happened to your mother, because I wasn't, but because for once someone said no and meant it. You reminded me of my father. He never had your platform, but he had your spine. I just wanted you to know not everyone forgets where they came from or who they stand up for." With deep respect, Camille Pierce Quincy read it twice, then folded it slowly and set it on the desk. That name, Camille Pierce, stirred something deep in his chest like an echo of a conversation he'd never had but somehow remembered. He dug through his inbox, checking for it. Nothing. No emails, no LinkedIn hits. Just the letter, sitting there like a bridge between two worlds. He walked to the window looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Lights were coming on in offices across the city. Other people making other decisions, building other legacies. But somewhere in Pennsylvania, a woman he'd never met had taken time to write him a letter, because his choice reminded her of her father. Later that night, he told his mother about it over dinner. They sat in her small kitchen in Newark, the same table where she'd helped him with homework 30 years ago, where she'd counted bills and made miracles out of minimum wage. She said her father was the groundskeeper, he said, pushing greens around on his plate. She said I reminded her of him. Vera looked thoughtful, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Funny how truth reaches you. Doesn't matter the route, it finds you. Quincy nodded but didn't speak. He didn't need to. The letter had landed like a weight in his chest, not heavy with regret, but with meaning. He carried so much responsibility now, so many people watching, analyzing, hoping. It felt good to know his choice had reached someone who'd lived in the shadow of that same gate for decades. Someone who understood the cost of dignity in a world that didn't always value it. "You want to meet her," Vera said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I think I do." "Then you should. Some conversations need to happen face to face." The next day, he asked Olivia to find Camille, quietly, without any media circus or corporate fanfare. She called 2 days later, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she'd uncovered something meaningful. Found her. Camille Pierce, 43, teaches 4th grade in Harrisburg. Lives alone in a small apartment with a rescue dog named Winston. Doesn't do social media, I mean at all. No Facebook, no Instagram, nothing. Her neighbors say she's the kind of teacher who spends her own money on supplies for kids whose families can't afford them. Quincy felt something shift in his chest. What else? Her father, Robert Pierce, worked the Kingsley estate for 34 years. Started when he was 18, worked until the day he died. Never missed a day, according to employment records. The interesting part? He was terminated 2 weeks before his pension would have fully vested. Terminated for what? No official reason given. just restructuring of groundskeeping services. But I found something else, a complaint he filed with the Labour Board 6 months before he died. Alleged discrimination, hostile work environment. It was dismissed without investigation. Quincy closed his eyes. Of course. Of course there was more to the story. Does she know about the complaint? I don't think so, the records were sealed. But Quincy, there's something else. She didn't expect you to write back. When I reached out through the school, she seemed genuinely shocked that you'd gotten her letter, let alone responded to it. I want to visit her, Quincy said. Should I call ahead? Set up a formal meeting? No, I'll knock. 2 days later, he stood on a small stoop in Harrisburg, holding a paper bag from a local bakery and feeling something he rarely felt anymore. Nervous. Not the kind of nervous that came with boardroom presentations or media interviews, but the kind that came with meeting someone whose opinion actually mattered to him. The neighborhood was quiet, working class, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and watched out for each other's kids. The kind of place he'd grown up in, before the success and the spotlight and the weight of representing something larger than himself. Camille opened the door after the second knock. She looked mid-40s, brown ponytail, wearing jeans and a school district sweatshirt that had seen better days. When she saw him, she froze, her hand still on the doorknob like she was trying to process whether this was really happening. I'm Quincy, he said, holding up the paper bag. And this is banana bread from Muller's Bakery downtown. Thought you might be tired of everyone only wanting something from you. Camille blinked, then let out a breathy laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep and genuine. Come in before my dog tries to eat you. Inside, the apartment was warm, lived in, filled with the kind of details that spoke to a life quietly well lived. Student artwork covered the refrigerator. Books were stacked on every surface. A framed photo of an older man in work boots sat on the mantel, and Quincy walked over to look at it closely. The man in the photo had Camille's eyes, the same quiet strength, the same dignity that came from knowing your worth even when others didn't see it. Your father? She nodded, moving to stand beside him. He worked that estate like it was his own, never complained, never cut corners, even when they... She trailed off. Even when they... What? Even when they made it clear he was just the help. The truth they found would change everything forever. Camille offered tea, and they sat at her small kitchen table, the afternoon light filtering through sheer curtains that had been mended more than once. She told him about her father, how he refused to call the Kingsleys sir and ma'am, even when it would have made his life easier. How he saved every check, no matter how small, building a future for his daughters $1 at a time. How he taught her to read using contracts and invoices he brought home, turning legal language into bedtime stories about fairness and justice. He'd have liked you, she said, wrapping her hands around her mug. Not because you made it big, but because you knew when to walk away. He always said the most important thing you own is your ability to say no. They spoke for 2 hours. Nothing recorded, no hashtags, no social media documentation. Just two people connected by a shared history neither had asked for, but both had carried in their bones. The weight of watching dignity get traded for convenience, of seeing good people treated as invisible. When Quincy finally left, she handed him a copy of an old photo, her dad standing under a tall oak on the Kingsley grounds, rake in hand, a quiet pride in his eyes that reminded Quincy of his own father. For when the world gets loud again, she said. He thanked her, tucked the photo into his jacket pocket next to his wallet, and walked back to his car. Because sometimes the most powerful reminders don't come from headlines. They come from handwritten words and old oak trees and teachers who spend their own money on crayons. But as he drove back to Newark, Quincy was about to face one final moment that would test whether everything he'd stood for could hold up under the most personal loss of all. It started with a voicemail from the nurse, just a gentle request to call back. Nothing urgent, she said. Vera had fainted briefly while at her weekly Bible study. They'd brought her to Capital Care Medical Center in Newark, just to be safe. The words hit him like cold water. He didn't wait for traffic lights or speed limits. He left a meeting mid-sentence, grabbed his keys, and drove the turnpike with his jaw locked tight and his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him steady. When he arrived, Vera was sitting up in the hospital bed, looking mildly annoyed and sipping ginger ale like she had better places to be. The sight of her, alert, talking, clearly frustrated with the attention, loosened something in his chest that he hadn't realized was clenched. "I told them I just stood too fast," she said as he walked in, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when people were making a fuss over nothing. "Didn't need all this circus." But Quincy could see it in her eyes, the fatigue that had been building for months, the way her hand trembled slightly as she set the cup down. The woman who had raised him to be strong was getting older, and all the success in the world couldn't change that simple, devastating fact. He sat beside her quietly, holding her wrist gently in his hand, feeling for the pulse that had been steady and strong his entire life. "What did the doctor say?" he asked. "That I need to slow down, take my iron pills, eat more greens. Same thing I tell you every Sunday." He smiled at that, but it didn't settle the knot in his chest. The knot that came from realizing that the person who had been his North Star, his moral compass, his unwavering source of strength, was human after all. A few minutes later, Dr. Mei Lin entered the room, young, sharp, direct, but with a kind face that suggested she'd delivered both good news and bad news often enough to know the difference. She glanced at Vera before speaking softly to Quincy, her voice carrying the weight of professional concern. "Your mother's vitals stabilized quickly, but we'd like to run one more test. Her blood pressure's fluctuating more than we'd like to see. She hasn't had a full cardiac workup in a while." Vera waved it off with the same dismissive gesture she'd used when he was 8 and worried about monsters under the bed. "I feel fine," Quincy nodded to the doctor. "Run the test." Then, to his mother, "Ma, let them check. For me." Over the next 2 days, as they waited for results, Quincy found himself thinking about time in a way he never had before. How it moved differently in hospital rooms, how it seemed both endless and precious. He thought about all the Sunday dinners he'd rushed through, all the phone calls he'd cut short because of meetings, all the moments he'd assumed would always be there. The results came in on a Thursday morning. Nothing dire, no ticking time bomb, but small flags, a leaky valve, mild arrhythmia, iron deficiency. Nothing urgent, but also nothing to ignore. The message was clear. Life doesn't wait forever, and neither do the people who love you. That night, as they sat together watching reruns of Sanford and Son in her hospital room, the same show they'd watched when he was 10 and homesick from school, Vera spoke without looking away from the screen. "You've done good, baby," he chuckled, the sound carrying more relief than humor. "Did you just call me baby in front of the nurse? I brought you into this world. I get to call you baby until the day I leave it." He smiled but didn't laugh, not fully. There was something in her tone, something that made him look at her more carefully. "I'm not done yet, Ma. We're not done yet." "I know," she said, her voice soft but certain. "But don't wait too long to live. Don't wait too long to build something that lasts beyond the business, beyond the money, beyond all of this noise." What happened next would surprise everyone. That conversation landed differently than any boardroom negotiation or media interview ever had. He looked at her, really looked, the deep lines carved by time and sacrifice, the hands that had worked double shifts so he could play Little League, the woman who never asked for a stage, but somehow became the heart of a national story about dignity and respect. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you told me, about legacy, about not handing down silence." She turned her head to him, her eyes bright with interest. "I want to start something," he continued, the words coming faster now as the idea crystallized. "A foundation for workers, drivers, warehouse crews, their families, real support, health screenings, childcare, tuition stipends. Not just write-ups and workshops and feel-good PR, action." Vera's mouth curved slowly into the kind of proud smile he remembered from childhood, when he'd brought home a good report card or helped an elderly neighbor with groceries. "That sounds like you. I want to name it after you." Now her eyes welled even if she tried to hide it with a cough and a dismissive wave. "You don't need to do that, baby." "I do," Quincy said, his voice firm but gentle. "Because you built me. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, everything I understand about what matters, it all comes from you." 3 weeks later, after Vera had been released and was recovering at home, the foundation papers were filed. The Vera Initiative. Not flashy, no red carpet launch or celebrity endorsements, Just a website, a simple launch video, and partnerships with 3 non-profits to start. It caught fire in ways Quincy hadn't expected. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. But more importantly, it reached the people it was meant to reach. Workers who had felt invisible, families who had struggled in silence, communities that had been overlooked by traditional charitable organizations. The first Community Day event was held in a converted warehouse in Newark, the same neighborhood where Quincy had started his company with nothing but determination and his mother's faith. Food trucks lined the lot. Kids ran between face painters and book drives. Workers who had once feared losing jobs now stood with families, eating barbecue and talking about the future. But it was what happened 3 days after that event that would test everything Quincy had learned about forgiveness, family, and the complicated weight of the past. It came through voicemail. No warning, just a blinking notification on Quincy's phone after a full day of meetings and interviews. He tapped the icon absent-mindedly as he walked through the front door of his apartment, expecting it to be a reminder from Marcus or maybe a vendor follow-up. But the second he heard the voice, he froze. "Quincy, it's Dwayne. Yeah, I wasn't sure you'd still have this number, but I heard about what you did, with the deal with your mother, and I just had to reach out. Dwayne, his father's brother, the one who hadn't called in over 20 years. The one who'd vanished the night they lowered his father into the ground. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence that had stretched across 2 decades like a chasm. I saw you on the news. Your mama raised you right, no surprise there. I'm proud of you and I'm sorry for a lot. If you ever want to talk, this is my number now." The message ended. No second call, no follow-up text. Quincy stood still, keys still in hand, staring at the now dark screen of his phone. His mind swirled with memories he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten they existed. He hadn't thought about Dwayne in years, hadn't let himself think about him. When his father died of a heart attack at 49, Quincy was 12 years old, and suddenly the man of a house that felt too big and too empty. It was Dwayne who stood next to him at the casket, promising, "I got you, nephew, I got you." Then nothing. Quincy remembered waking up on his 13th birthday, hoping for a card, a call, anything that would prove he hadn't been completely forgotten. It never came. He remembered his high school graduation, scanning the crowd for a face that looked like his father's. He remembered starting his business, wondering if Dwayne had heard, if he cared, if he was proud. He poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen counter listening to the message again. The voice was older now, slower, weathered by whatever 2 decades of absence had cost him, but it was unmistakably him. That night he couldn't sleep. Memories came back fast and sharp. His dad fixing the water heater on a cold morning, grease on his hands and patience in his voice as he explained how things worked. Dwayne bringing over ribs in foil every 4th of July, teaching Quincy how to throw a curveball in the backyard. Then the silence, sudden and complete, like someone had closed a door and forgotten to tell him why. In the morning, Vera called, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant she had something important to say. "I heard from Dwayne," she said without waiting for small talk. Quincy's grip tightened on the phone. "I called you. Left a message yesterday, same as he did with you, I'm guessing. I don't know what he wants." "Maybe nothing," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe he's trying to make peace while he still has time. Maybe he's finally figured out that some silences cost too much. I'm not sure I need peace with him, Ma." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who had forgiven more than her share of disappointments. "Baby, sometimes peace ain't for them. It's for you." These stories of courage and dignity inspire people all around the world. Let us know what country and city you're watching from, so we can see how far these powerful messages about standing up for family are reaching. That line stuck with him for days. Sometimes peace ain't for them, it's for you. He found himself thinking about it during meetings, during his morning runs, during the quiet moments when the weight of carrying other people's hopes and expectations felt almost too heavy to bear. Later that day, he replayed the voicemail again. And this time, instead of anger or hurt, he felt something different. Tiredness. Like a part of him had been holding something up for too long, carrying a resentment that had become heavier than the original wound. He waited until evening, then picked up the phone and called back. 3 rings, then a click. "Quincy?" the voice asked, cautious but hopeful, like he couldn't quite believe this was really happening. "Yeah, it's me." A long pause, filled with 20 years of silence and the weight of words that had never been said. Then a small laugh, shaky with emotion. "You sound just like your father. I get that a lot." Neither spoke right away. Quincy could hear traffic in the background, the distant sound of a television, the ordinary noises of a life he knew nothing about. Then Dwayne sighed, the sound carrying more weight than any explanation could. "I'm not calling to explain away the silence. I can't do that. Wouldn't be fair to try. I was a coward after your dad passed. I couldn't look at anything that reminded me of him. And you were a mirror." Quincy said nothing, letting the words settle. "I left because it was easier than staying and failing you. Easier than watching you need something I didn't think I could give." "I didn't need you to succeed," Quincy said quietly, the words coming from a place he'd kept locked for 2 decades. "I just needed you to stay." Dwayne's voice cracked. I know I let you down when you needed me most." They spoke for 15 more minutes. Not about business, not about betrayal, not about the success or the failure or the years that had passed like water under a bridge neither of them could see anymore. They talked about fishing trips from when Quincy was 8, about his father's laugh, the way he'd sing in the shower, the way he'd always burn the first pancake but somehow make the rest perfect. About how Dwayne had been following Quincy's career from the sidelines, quietly proud, too ashamed to reach out, but too connected to truly let go. When they hung up, Quincy didn't feel closure. That would take time if it came at all. But he felt lighter, like setting down a suitcase he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was in his hand. Later that week, he mentioned the call at a team retreat, speaking to a room full of people who had become more than employees. They had become the family he'd chosen to build. "Forgiveness isn't approval," he told them, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from lived experience. "It's just refusing to let bitterness take up all your space. It's choosing what you carry and what you set down." People nodded, some smiled, and a few understood more deeply than they showed, recognizing their own complicated relationships in his words. Meanwhile, the Vera initiative was growing beyond anything he'd imagined. What had started as a simple idea, supporting working families with dignity, had become a movement that was changing how companies thought about their responsibilities to their workers. 6 months after walking away from the Kingsley deal, Quincy stood in a converted warehouse in Newark, addressing a crowd of over 500 people, workers, families, local officials, and yes, even some former skeptics who had come to see what all the fuss was about. "We're not here to save anyone," Quincy said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly across the warehouse floor. "We're here to recognize that everyone deserves the same respect, the same opportunities, the same chance to build something lasting. We're here because dignity isn't a luxury, it's a right." In the front row, Vera sat in her wheelchair. She'd needed it more often lately, though she'd never admit it. Her eyes were bright, proud, watching her son speak to a room full of people who understood that some principles were worth more than profit. Behind them, banners hung from the ceiling. "Every worker matters, dignity in every job. Respect has no price tag." Simple words that carried the weight of revolution for people who had spent their lives being told that their worth was measured by their productivity, their value determined by their replaceability. But the most powerful moment came when Camille Pierce took the stage. She'd driven down from Harrisburg, carrying that same photo of her father under the oak tree, her hands shaking slightly as she stepped up to the microphone. "My dad worked for people who never knew his name," she said, her voice steady but emotional, each word carrying the weight of 34 years of invisible labor. "He taught me that your worth isn't measured by how others see you. It's measured by how you see yourself, and how you treat others who can't do anything for you." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word, recognizing their own stories in hers. Quincy Sterling didn't just walk away from a deal. He walked toward something better. He walked toward us. The applause was thunderous this time, not polite, not obligatory, genuine. The kind of applause that comes from people who have felt invisible finally being seen. Later, as the crowd mingled over barbecue and live music, Quincy found himself standing with Marcus and Olivia, watching kids play on bounce houses while their parents shared stories and contact information, building networks of support that would outlast any single event. The consequences were just beginning. "You know the irony?" Marcus said, sipping his drink and watching a group of warehouse workers exchange business cards like executives at a conference. "What's that?" "We're probably going to make more money in the long run than that Kingsley deal would have given us. 3 major corporations want to partner with us now, not despite what you did, but because of it." Olivia nodded, her marketing mind always calculating the angles. Authenticity is the new luxury in business, and you can't fake what happened that day at the country club. You can't manufacture that kind of moral clarity. Quincy watched a little girl with pigtails run up to Vera's wheelchair, offering her a drawing of a flower made with purple crayon and the kind of careful attention that only children bring to gifts that matter. His mother accepted it like it was a Picasso, studying every crayon line with serious attention, asking questions about the colors and the story behind the picture. "It was never about the money," he said finally. "We know," Marcus replied. "That's why it worked." As the evening wound down, Quincy helped Vera into the car. She was tired but energized, the way she got after church on Sundays when the sermon hit just right, and the congregation sang like they meant every word. "You did good today, baby," she said as he buckled her seatbelt, her hands folding the child's drawing carefully so it wouldn't wrinkle. "We did good," he corrected. "This is all you, Ma. Your values, your strength, your refusal to let anyone tell you that respect is negotiable." She patted his hand with the gentle authority she'd always carried. "No, it's yours now. And you're going to keep building it long after I'm gone." That caught him off guard, the casualness with which she mentioned her own mortality. "Don't talk like that." "I'm not going anywhere tomorrow," she said with a smile that carried both reassurance and truth. "But when I do, I want you to remember something. Respect isn't something you earn once and keep forever. It's something you practice every day with every person in every moment, rich or poor, powerful or not. Dignity is the same for everyone." He squeezed her hand, memorizing the feeling of her fingers, the softness of skin that had worked so hard for so long. "I'll remember." As they drove through Newark, past the old warehouse where it all started, past the neighborhoods where Vera had raised him with nothing but love and determination and an unshakable belief that character mattered more than circumstances, Quincy felt something he hadn't felt in years: complete peace. The Kingsley family had issued 3 more statements since his press conference, each one more desperate than the last, each one missing the point more completely than the one before. Patricia herself had been quietly removed from the board of directors by her own sons. Her empire diminished, not by hostile takeover, but by the simple recognition that some kinds of leadership were no longer acceptable. But Quincy didn't feel victorious. He felt responsible, not for their downfall but for the example he was setting. Every worker who walked a little taller because of his decision. Every mother who knew her dignity mattered as much as anyone else's. Every kid who learned that principle was worth more than profit. His phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. "Saw the news about the foundation. The warehouse workers, the families, all of it. I'm proud of you, cousin. Dad would have been too. Some relationships heal, some bridges get rebuilt. And sometimes, standing up for what's right doesn't just change you, it changes everyone around you." 1 year later, Quincy sat in the same hospital room where his journey toward understanding legacy had truly begun. But this time the bed was empty, and the flowers on the windowsill were fresh gardenias, Vera's favorites, brought by visitors who had never met her but understood what she represented. She'd passed peacefully in her sleep 3 days earlier, surrounded by family, with Quincy holding her hand and reading her favorite psalm. No pain, no struggle, just a quiet transition from one kind of presence to another. The funeral had been unlike anything Newark had ever seen. CEOs sat next to warehouse workers. Politicians listened to grocery store clerks share memories. The mayor spoke, but so did Mrs. Thompson from down the street, who remembered Vera bringing soup when her husband was sick. But it was the letter that had arrived that morning that truly broke him. Addressed to the Sterling family, with no return address, written on school notebook paper in careful handwriting. "My name is Maria Santos. I work third shift at the Metro Corp warehouse in Phoenix. I never met Mrs. Vera, but she saved my family. Last year, when my daughter needed surgery and I couldn't afford to take time off, I heard about the Vera initiative. They didn't just help with the medical bills, they made sure I could keep my job and be with my little girl. When I tried to thank them, they said, "This is what Mrs. Vera would have wanted." I wanted you to know, your mother's legacy is alive in Phoenix, in Detroit, in families across the country who remember that dignity doesn't have a price tag. Thank you for teaching us that standing up for what's right is always worth it. As he walked out of the hospital for the final time, Quincy thought about everything that had changed since that day at the Hamptons Country Club. The foundation would continue, the company would grow. And every Sunday he'd still bring gardenias to Vera's grave, along with updates about the families they were helping and the workers who were walking a little taller. Because respect isn't negotiable, dignity doesn't depreciate. And sometimes the most valuable thing you can inherit isn't wealth. It's the unshakable knowledge that doing right by people is always the right choice. Thank you to everyone who typed respect and to all who shared their locations from around the world. Your global support means everything. If these stories of courage and family dignity inspire you, please subscribe to join our community and help us share more incredible tales of standing up for what's right. Until next time, keep believing in the power of respect and family values.